George Strait, American country singer, sees a young pregnant woman selling sweets on the street, and what he did will make you cry. The relentless Texas sun beat down on the dusty sidewalk of East Austin, casting harsh shadows across the cracked concrete. It was the kind of summer heat that made even the most stoic Texans seek refuge in air-conditioned sanctuaries. Yet there she stood, a young woman, no more than 19, her rounded belly protruding beneath a faded floral sundress. Melissa Rodriguez wiped beads of sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, careful not to disturb the neatly arranged display of homemade pastries on the folding table before her. Her dark eyes scanned the street, hopeful for potential customers. The morning had been painfully slow. Only 3 people had stopped to purchase her carefully crafted treats. The small jar labeled Baby Fund contained just $17.43, not nearly enough for the prenatal vitamins the clinic had prescribed at her last visit. If you're enjoying this story about unexpected kindness and second chances, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our weekly heartwarming tales that remind us there's still goodness in this world. Melissa shifted her weight from one swollen ankle to the other, wincing slightly at the discomfort. The doctor had advised her to stay off her feet, but what choice did she have? The rent was due in 4 days, and her last ultrasound bill remained unpaid. Her parents, hard-working Mexican immigrants who already juggled multiple jobs to support her 3 younger siblings, couldn't bear another financial burden, not even for their eldest daughter and her unborn child. Just a few more hours, she whispered to herself, gently caressing her stomach where the baby had been kicking all morning. Then we'll go home, mi angelito. 6 miles across town, George Strait adjusted his signature resistal cowboy hat as he climbed into his Ford F-150. The country music legend had just wrapped up a long rehearsal session for his upcoming benefit concert at the Frank Erwin Center. At 67, Strait still commanded the respect of musicians half his age, his baritone voice just as rich and powerful as it had been when he released his first hit single decades ago. "See you tomorrow, George," called out his longtime guitarist, waving from the studio entrance. George returned the wave with a warm smile. "Bright and early, Benny. We've still got work to do on that bridge in Amarillo by morning." As the truck's engine roared to life, George's phone buzzed with a notification. His daughter-in-law, Tamara, had sent him a text. "Traffic on I-35 is at a standstill, multi-car pile-up. Better take the back roads home." George sighed, tapping a new route into his GPS. After 40 years in the music business and more #1 hits than any artist in history, George Strait could afford any luxury he desired. Yet he still preferred to drive himself most days, finding peace in the simple act of navigation through the increasingly crowded streets of Austin. The alternative route took him through neighborhoods he rarely visited, working-class areas with small, tidy homes and chain-link fences. Children played in sprinklers to escape the heat, and neighbors chatted across driveways. There was an authenticity here that reminded George of his own humble beginnings in Petite, Texas. It was then that he spotted her, a lone figure standing beside a small table on the corner of Montopolis Drive, the sun beating mercilessly upon her head. Something about her determined posture caught his attention. Before he could think twice, George pulled his truck to the curb. Melissa looked up as the gleaming black F-150 stopped near her stand. Her heart raced momentarily. Was this trouble? In her 5 days of street selling, she'd encountered enough leering men and dismissive comments to make her wary of strangers. But when the driver's door opened, a tall, trim man in his 60s stepped out, wearing jeans, boots, and a button-down shirt. His silver hair peeked out from beneath a well-worn cowboy hat, and kind eyes crinkled at the corners as he approached. "Afternoon, Mom," he said, his voice carrying the smooth, familiar cadence of deep Texas roots. "Mighty hot day to be out here selling. Melissa nodded, not recognizing the country music icon standing before her. "Yes, sir, but these treats are fresh made this morning. I've got chocolate chip cookies, cinnamon brownies, and my abuela's special tres leches cake cups." George surveyed the modest display, noting the care with which each item had been wrapped in cellophane and tied with colorful ribbons. Behind the pastries sat a small jar with a hand-drawn label reading "Baby Fund" in careful script. "They look delicious," George said, genuinely impressed by the professional presentation. "I'll take one of each. What do I owe you?" "That would be $12, sir," Melissa replied, her voice brightening at the prospect of a good sale. As she gathered his purchases, George noticed her wince slightly when bending to retrieve a paper bag from beneath the table. "How long have you been standing out here today?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes observant. Melissa hesitated, then admitted, "Since 9 this morning, about 5 hours now." George nodded, looking around at the nearly empty street. "Business been good?" "Not really," she confessed, handing him the bag of treats, "but every little bit helps." When George passed her a $50 bill, Melissa's eyes widened. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't have change for that." "Don't need change," George replied simply. "Keep it." Melissa shook her head firmly. "No, sir, I'm not looking for charity. I'm working for my money. Please let me give you your change." George was struck by her dignity. In a world where people were quick to take handouts, here was someone insisting on earning her way despite difficult circumstances. It reminded him of his own mother, who had worked cleaning houses even when her arthritis made every movement painful. "Tell you what," George said after a moment, "how about I buy everything you've got left? I'm heading to meet some friends, and I'm sure they'd appreciate some homemade treats." Melissa looked uncertain. "Everything? But that's nearly 30 items. That would be $120 by my count," George said, pulling out more cash, "and worth every penny if they're as good as they look." Before she could protest further, he added, "And I insist on paying full price. Good baking is an art, young lady." As Melissa began carefully packing all her remaining goods, George casually asked, "So, when's the baby due?" 2 months, she replied, a mixture of joy and worry crossing her features. "A boy." "Congratulations. First child?" "Yes," Melissa said, pausing to rest her hand on her stomach as the baby kicked. "His father. He isn't in the picture anymore. Left when I told him I was pregnant." George's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "His loss," he said simply. As she continued packing the pastries, George asked, "You do this every day, selling out here?" Melissa shook her head. "I used to work, at Hernandez Cafe as I'm prep cook. But Mr. Hernandez let me go when I started showing, said customers don't want to see a pregnant girl handling their food." Her voice remained steady, but the hurt was evident in her eyes. "I've been applying everywhere, but no one wants to hire someone who'll need maternity leave right away." "You like cooking then?" George asked. For the first time since he'd approached, Melissa's face lit up with genuine passion. "I love it. I was saving for culinary school before." She gestured to her belly. "My dream was to be a pastry chef, maybe open my own bakery someday." George sampled one of the cinnamon brownies, his eyebrows raising in appreciation. "This is exceptional," he said, and it wasn't just kindness speaking. The brownie had the perfect balance of chewiness and spice. "You've got real talent." Melissa blushed at the compliment. "My grandmother taught me. She was the best baker in our village back in Mexico." As George helped her fold the now empty table, he asked casually, "You said you've been applying for jobs? Anywhere specific?" "Everywhere," Melissa sighed. "Restaurants, bakeries, cafes, grocery stores, even called that new fancy hotel downtown, but they won't even interview me without formal training." George nodded thoughtfully. "Well, don't give up. The right opportunity might be closer than you think. As Melissa struggled to lift the folding table, George gently took it from her hands. "Let me help you with that. Where's your car?" Melissa pointed to an ancient Toyota Corolla parked a few spaces down, its blue paint faded from years under the Texas sun. "It was my parents'. They gave it to me when they finally saved enough for a newer model." They loaded the table into her trunk, and George placed the large box of pastries carefully on the passenger seat. Before closing the door, he slipped his business card underneath the box, not his usual public contact information, but the direct line to his personal assistant. "Thank you again, sir. You've made my whole week with this purchase," Melissa said, extending her hand. George shook it warmly. "George, the name's George, and it was my pleasure." As he turned to leave, he added, "Those brownies really are something special. Don't forget that." As George drove away, Melissa finally looked at the money in her hand and gasped. Mixed in with the expected bills was a crisp $500 note. She looked up quickly, but the black truck had already disappeared around the corner. Later, that evening, as Melissa recounted the story to her mother in their small apartment kitchen, she still couldn't believe the stranger's generosity. "Mama, I tried to chase after him, but he was gone so fast. It must have been a mistake. Nobody gives $500 for pastries." Elena Rodriguez continued chopping onions for dinner, her hands moving with practiced efficiency despite her exhaustion after a 12-hour shift cleaning offices. "Mija, sometimes God sends angels when we need them most. This man, whoever he was, saw your hard work and your situation. It was no mistake. But Mama, we can't keep this. It's too much." Elena put down her knife and faced her daughter. "Melissa, your pride is admirable, but remember there is no shame in accepting help when it is offered with respect. This money will pay for your next doctor's visit and your medication. For the baby, your son. Sometimes we must humble ourselves for those who depend on us." Melissa sat heavily on a kitchen chair, one hand resting on her belly. The baby was active tonight, as if excited by the day's events. "I didn't even thank him properly," she whispered. "I don't even know who he was." Meanwhile, across town in his ranch-style home, nestled in the hills overlooking Austin, George Strait sat on his porch with a glass of whiskey, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. His wife of nearly 50 years, Norma, joined him, placing her hand gently on his shoulder. "You're quiet tonight," she observed. "Rehearsal didn't go well?" George covered her hand with his own. "Rehearsal was fine. It's something else." He recounted his encounter with Melissa, describing her determination and pride despite her circumstances. "She reminded me of you," he told Norma. "Same fire in her eyes that you had when we were just starting out, and everyone said a rodeo cowboy had no business dreaming of a music career." Norma smiled at the memory of their early struggles. "So what are you thinking, George?" He sipped his whiskey thoughtfully. "I'm thinking about making a call tomorrow. I've got a friend who owes me a favor." The next morning, as Melissa prepared for another day of street selling, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. "Hello, Ms. Rodriguez. This is Patricia Winters, Executive Admissions Officer at the Austin Culinary Institute. I'm calling because we've had a last-minute opening in our professional pastry arts program, and your application has been selected for consideration." Melissa nearly dropped the phone. "My application? But I never applied to—" "We received your samples yesterday," Patricia continued smoothly. "Some of the finest home baking our head chef has tasted in years. We would like to offer you a spot in our upcoming class, with a full scholarship covering tuition and materials." Melissa sank into a chair, her free hand instinctively cradling her belly. "But I'm pregnant. I'll need time off when the baby comes." "We are prepared to accommodate your situation, Ms. Rodriguez. The scholarship includes deferred enrollment should you need maternity leave. Additionally, we offer on-campus childcare for our student parents. Tears welled in Melissa's eyes. This can't be real. I assure you it's very real, Patricia said warmly. Someone believes in your talent very strongly, Ms. Rodriguez. But Tibu, only question is, do you believe in it too? As Melissa ended the call in a daze, she noticed something on her kitchen counter. The business card that must have fallen from her bag when she unpacked the money yesterday. It was elegant but simple, with just a name and phone number, George Strait. Her hand flew to her mouth as recognition finally dawned. The kind stranger in the cowboy hat hadn't been just any Texan. He had been the king of country himself. George Strait, Melissa whispered, staring at the business card in her trembling fingers. It was actually him. She had grown up hearing his songs. Her father would play them on their old radio while working on weekend projects around the house. Though she wasn't a devoted fan like her dad, even Melissa knew George Strait was country music royalty, with more #1 hits than any artist in history. And he had bought her pastries, had slipped her $500, had somehow, impossibly, arranged a full scholarship to the culinary school of her dreams. The realization was overwhelming. Melissa sank deeper into the kitchen chair, her mind racing. Why would a legendary musician take such an interest in her? Was this some kind of elaborate publicity stunt? But there had been no cameras, no entourage, not even a mention of who he was. Her mother entered the kitchen, still wearing her cleaning uniform after returning from her morning job. "Mia, who was on the phone? You look like you've seen a ghost." When Melissa explained what had happened, Elena crossed herself instinctively. Dios mio, George Strait? The singer your father loves? "Mama, what do I do?" Melissa asked, her voice quavering between excitement and uncertainty. "I can't accept this. It's too much from a stranger." Elena took the business card, examining it carefully as if it might provide answers. "Call him," she said finally. "Thank him properly and understand his intentions, then decide." Before Melissa could respond, a sharp pain shot through her abdomen. She gasped, clutching her belly. "Melissa!" Her mother was immediately at her side, concern etched across her weathered face. "I'm okay," Melissa assured her, though her pale face suggested otherwise. "Just a contraction. The doctor said they might happen. Braxton Hicks, he called them." But when a second, sharper pain followed minutes later, Elena was already reaching for her phone. "We're going to the hospital." Now, across town, George was in the middle of a production meeting for his upcoming benefit concert when his personal phone vibrated. Seeing his assistant's name flash on the screen, he excused himself and stepped into the hallway. "What's up, Marion?" "George, I've got Austin General Hospital on the other line. A young woman named Melissa Rodriguez was admitted with pregnancy complications, and your card was in her purse as an emergency contact." George's brow furrowed in concern. "The young lady from yesterday, is she all right?" "They wouldn't give me details due to privacy laws, but they said she's asking for you." Without hesitation, George replied, "Tell them I'm on my way." 30 minutes later, George navigated the fluorescent-lit corridors of Austin General's maternity ward, his cowboy hat in his hands out of respect. A nurse at the station recognized him immediately, her eyes widening in surprise. "Mr. Strait, we weren't sure if you'd actually come. Ms. Rodriguez is in room 304. The doctor is with her now." When George entered the room, he found Melissa propped up in a hospital bed, looking both embarrassed and relieved to see him. Her mother stood protectively at her side, eyeing the country star with cautious appreciation. "Mr. Strait," Melissa began, her voice small, "I'm so sorry they called you. I never meant—" "No apologies needed," George interrupted gently. "How are you feeling? And the baby?" "False alarm," she explained, color returning to her cheeks. The doctor says I was dehydrated from standing in the heat yesterday. The contractions were my body's way of protesting. Elena stepped forward, extending her hand. Mr. Strait, I'm Elena Rodriguez, Melissa's mother. Thank you for what you did for my daughter. George shook her hand warmly. Please, call me George. And I didn't do anything special. Your daughter's talent did all the work. A doctor entered then, a tall, distinguished man with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He stopped short at the sight of George Strait standing in his patient's room. Well, this is unexpected, he said, recovering quickly. Mr. Strait, I'm Dr. Harrison. I wasn't aware you and Ms. Rodriguez were acquainted. Recent friends, George replied easily. How's she doing, Doc? Dr. Harrison consulted the chart in his hands. She'll be fine with proper rest and hydration. I'm recommending bed rest for at least 3 days. He turned to Melissa with a stern expression, which means no more selling pastries in 100-degree heat, young lady. Melissa's face fell. But doctor, you need to think about your baby, Dr. Harrison interrupted firmly. Your blood pressure was dangerously elevated when you came in. Next time we might not be dealing with just a false alarm. After the doctor left, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. George could see the worry clouding Melissa's expression. 3 days without selling meant 3 days without income. The culinary school called this morning, Melissa finally said, looking up at George. How did you do that? George pulled up a chair beside her bed. I know people who know people, he said simply. The executive chef owes me a favor from way back. When I told him about your baking skills, he was intrigued. When he tasted those brownies, he was convinced. But a full scholarship, that must have cost... George waved away her concern. Consider it an investment in talent. This industry needs more people with genuine passion and skill. Eleanor touched her daughter's shoulder gently. Mija, I need to leave for my afternoon shift. Will you be okay? I'll stay a while if that's all right, George offered. My schedule's clear for the next couple hours. After Eleanor reluctantly departed, promising to return that evening, George settled more comfortably in the chair beside Melissa's bed. I looked you up last night, Melissa admitted. I couldn't believe it was really you. My dad has all your records. George smiled modestly. Been at it a long time. Why help me? Melissa asked directly, her dark eyes searching his face. You don't know me. I'm nobody. That's where you're wrong, George replied, leaning forward slightly. Nobody's nobody. And sometimes folks just need a hand up, not a handout. My career wouldn't have happened without people believing in me when I was just a nobody with a guitar. He told her about his early days, struggling to make ends meet, playing small honky-tonks while raising a young family, almost giving up music altogether to work full-time on his father's ranch. My wife, Norma, she worked extra shifts as a teacher so I could keep chasing that dream, he recalled, a distant look in his eyes. And then my daughter, Jennifer, died in a car accident when she was just 13, nearly broke us. Melissa's eyes widened. She hadn't known this part of his story. I'm so sorry. It was a long time ago, George said softly. But it taught me something important. Life is short and unpredictable. When you see a chance to help someone, really help them. Change their circumstances, you take it. A nurse interrupted them, bringing Melissa's discharge papers. Remember bed rest for 3 days, she reminded firmly. Doctor's orders. When the nurse left, Melissa sighed. I don't know how I'll manage that. My mother works double shifts, and my father's crew is on a construction project 2 hours away. George considered this problem. I might have a solution if you're willing to trust me a little further. 2 hours later, a sleek black SUV pulled up outside Austin General. The driver, a professional-looking woman in her 40s, approached Melissa's wheelchair with a warm smile. Ms. Rodriguez, I'm Tamara Strait, George's daughter-in-law. I'll be taking you home today. Melissa looked uncertainly at George, who stood nearby finishing a phone call. "It's okay," Tamara assured her. "George explained everything. I'm happy to help." George rejoined them, helping Melissa into the SUV despite her protests that she could manage. "Tamara is going to stay with you these next few days while you rest. She's a former nurse, so you'll be in good hands." "But," Melissa began. "Already cleared it with your mother," George said, anticipating her objection. "She was relieved, actually. Said she's been worried sick about leaving you alone." As Tamara drove them through the Austin traffic, Melissa found herself wondering if she was dreaming. 24 hours ago, she had been standing on a street corner selling pastries, desperate for enough money to buy prenatal vitamins. Now, she was riding in a luxury SUV with the family of a country music legend who had somehow taken a personal interest in her welfare. When they arrived at Melissa's modest apartment complex, Tamara efficiently organized everything, setting up a comfortable recovery space in the small living room and stocking the refrigerator with healthy meals she had prepared in advance. "George said you're a baker," Tamara remarked as she helped Melissa settle onto the couch. "My son is apprenticing at Lucille's bakery downtown. Maybe you two should talk sometime." Melissa couldn't help but notice how Tamara made no mention of her pregnancy, treated nothing about the situation as abnormal or worthy of judgment. She simply moved about the apartment with practical efficiency, occasionally checking Melissa's blood pressure with a portable monitor she had brought. "Why are you all being so kind to me?" Melissa finally asked. "You don't even know me." Tamara paused her activity, considering the question seriously. "George has always had a good sense about people. If he thinks you're special, that's good. Enough for us." After a moment, she added, "Plus, he said your cinnamon brownies were the best he'd ever tasted, and George doesn't exaggerate about food." That evening, as Melissa rested on the couch, her phone pinged with an email notification. It was from the Austin Culinary Institute, confirming her enrollment and detailing the scholarship provisions. Classes would begin in 2 months, perfectly, timed for after her delivery if the baby arrived as scheduled. Attached to the email was a personal note from the executive chef, "Looking forward to seeing what you can create in a proper kitchen. Your cinnamon technique is exceptional, Chef Marcos." For the first time in months, Melissa felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. Not just the desperate clinging to survival that had carried her through each day, but genuine hope for a future with possibilities. When her mother returned that night, exhausted from her double shift, Eleanor was astonished to find a virtual stranger organizing their small kitchen, preparing a nutritious dinner for all of them. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Tamara greeted her warmly. "I've made enchiladas. George mentioned your daughter said you're from Oaxaca originally, so I tried to find a recipe that might remind you of home." Eleanor stood frozen in the doorway, her weathered hands still clutching her purse. "This is very kind," she managed finally, the weight of the day's events catching up with her. "Too kind." "Not at all," Tamara replied, serving the food onto their mismatched plates without a hint of condescension. "It's what neighbors do." Over dinner, Elena gradually relaxed, sharing stories of her hometown in Mexico and asking polite questions about Tamara's family. Melissa, watching from the couch, marveled at how naturally Tamara had integrated herself into their home, bringing comfort rather than intrusion. Later, when Tamara had retired to the small guest room, normally occupied by Melissa's younger brother, who was staying with a cousin during college breaks, Melissa's mother sat beside her on the couch. "This man, this George Strait," Elena said softly, "he must have seen something very special in you, Misha. Or he just felt sorry for me," Melissa replied, voicing the doubt that had lingered all day. Elena shook her head firmly. "No. Men like him, successful, important men, they don't spend time on charity cases. They write checks and move on. This is different." She took her daughter's hand. "This is destiny opening a door. You must be brave enough to walk through it." The following morning, Melissa awoke to the gentle sounds of conversation from the kitchen. Carefully rising from the couch, she found Tamara and her mother cooking breakfast together, laughing like old friends. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Tamara greeted her. "Blood pressure check before breakfast, doctor's orders." As Tamara took her vitals, Melissa noticed a tall stack of books on the dining table. "What are those?" "Your course materials," Tamara explained. "George had them delivered early. Thought you might want to get a head start during your bed rest." Melissa flipped through the top book, The Fundamentals of Pastry Arts, her fingers trembling slightly. "This is really happening, isn't it?" "It really is," Tamara confirmed, recording Melissa's blood pressure in a small notebook. "And your numbers are already looking better." Amazing what a little rest and hope can do for the body. Melissa's phone. It rang, an unfamiliar number. She answered cautiously. "Ms. Rodriguez, this is Patricia Winters again, from the Austin Culinary Institute. I hope I'm not calling too early." "No, not at all," Melissa assured her. "Wonderful. I'm calling because Chef Marcos was so impressed with your sample work that he'd like to offer you an additional opportunity. We have a high-profile catering event next month, and he'd like you to contribute your cinnamon brownies to the dessert menu. It would be paid, of course, and excellent exposure for a new student." Melissa's free hand flew to her mouth in surprise. Yes, absolutely. Thank you." After ending the call, she looked up to find both her mother and Tamara watching her, with matching expressions of pride. "Good news?" Tamara asked, though her smile suggested she already knew the answer. "They want my brownies for a catering event next month," Melissa said, still processing the information. "A paid position." Elena crossed herself, tears welling in her eyes. "Your abuela is smiling down from heaven today. Her recipes, her techniques, they will live on through you." As Melissa basked in this moment of triumph, she couldn't help wondering what George Strait's role was in this latest development. Was this another of his kindnesses, or had Chef Marcos genuinely been impressed with her baking? And what would happen when she could no longer rely on the country star's generosity? The scholarship would cover her education, but there was still the matter of living expenses, medical bills, and the countless costs associated with raising a child alone. The baby kicked, as if sensing her thoughts, reminding her that time was moving forward regardless of her worries. In less than 2 months, she would be a mother. The thought was both terrifying and wondrous. What Melissa didn't know was that, across town, George Strait was engaged in a heated discussion with a man whose actions would soon threaten everything that had just begun to fall into place. "You can't be serious," Victor Hernandez said, his voice tight with anger. "You want me to rehire the girl after I already replaced her?" George leaned back in the booth of the empty cafe, his expression calm but resolute. "I'm not asking you to rehire her. I'm offering to buy a controlling interest in Hernandez Cafe, and my first executive decision would be to create a proper pastry department, headed by Melissa Rodriguez, once she completes her culinary training." Victor's face darkened. "So that's why you came here? She went crying to a celebrity, and now you're throwing your weight around." "Nay, she doesn't know I'm here," George replied evenly. "And this isn't about charity, it's about business. Your cafe has potential, but your dessert menu is lacking. I've seen what Melissa can create with minimal resources. Imagine what she could do with proper equipment and training." "She got herself pregnant," Victor said dismissively. "Shows poor judgment." George's eyes hardened, though his tone remained conversational. "Funny thing about judgment, Victor. We've all needed someone to suspend it at some point in our lives." He slid a folder across the table. "My offer's in there. It's generous. Think it over." As George stood to leave, Victor called after him. "Why her? What's so special about this girl?" George paused, considering the question. Sometimes you just hear a note that resonates. Melissa's got music in her hands when she bakes. Same as I felt the first time I stepped on stage at the Grand Ole Opry. He settled his cowboy hat on his head. Call my lawyer when you've decided. What neither man realized was that a kitchen worker had overheard their entire conversation through the partially open office door. And by nightfall, the news of George Strait's interest in Hernandez Cafe and in a certain pregnant former employee would be spreading throughout East Austin's tight-knit Hispanic community. By the following morning, Melissa's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Childhood friends, distant relatives, former co-workers, suddenly everyone wanted to check in on the girl George Strait had taken under his wing. Most callers claimed they were just concerned about her health after hearing she'd been hospitalized, but their thinly veiled curiosity about her connection to the country music legend was obvious. "Another call?" Tamara asked, noticing Melissa's exasperated expression as she declined yet another incoming number she didn't recognize. "Fourth one this hour," Melissa sighed, setting her phone face down on the coffee table. "How did everyone find out? I didn't tell anyone except Mama." Tamara frowned, pouring herbal tea into a mug for Melissa. "Small communities have big ears. Someone probably saw George at the hospital." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "George is used to this kind of attention, but I understand it must be overwhelming for you." Elena entered from the bedroom, dressed for her cleaning job, worry lines creasing her forehead. "Misha, Mrs. Vasquez from church just texted me, asking if it's true that George Strait is the father of your baby." "What?" Melissa nearly choked on her tea. "That's ridiculous." "People love scandal," Tamara said matter-of-factly, though her eyes reflected concern, "and they rarely let facts get in the way of a good story." Elena kissed her daughter's forehead. "Ignore the chismosos, mija. We know the truth." She grabbed her purse, heading for the door. "I'll be home by 3, please. Rest." After Elena left, Melissa struggled to focus on the culinary textbook in her lap. The rumors were absurd, but still she felt a wave of embarrassment at the thought of George hearing such gossip. He had shown her nothing but kindness, and this was how the community repaid him, with tawdry speculation. Tamara seemed to read her thoughts. "Don't worry about George. He's weathered worse storms in his career. This will blow over." But by lunchtime, it was clear the situation was escalating rather than dissipating. Melissa's social media accounts were flooded with friend requests and messages from strangers. Local news stations had left voicemails requesting interviews. Even tabloid reporters had somehow obtained her number. When a knock came at the apartment door, Tamara approached cautiously, checking through the peephole before opening it. "Carlos?" Melissa called from the couch, recognizing the voice in the hallway. "Is that you?" Carlos Rodriguez, no relation to Melissa, despite the shared surname, entered the apartment with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Tall and handsome, with warm brown eyes and an athletic build, he had the easy charm that had made him the most popular waiter at Hernandez Cafe. "Hey, Mel," he said, his smile fading as he took in her pale appearance and the medical equipment beside the couch. "You okay? I heard you were in the hospital." "Just dehydration," Melissa assured him. "Carlos, this is Tamara. She's a friend who's helping me while I'm on bed rest." Carlos nodded politely to Tamara before turning back to Melissa. "The whole cafe's talking about you. Victor's furious, stomping around, breaking dishes, yelling at everyone." "Why? What did I do?" Carlos hesitated, glancing at Tamara uncertainly. "It's okay," Melissa said. "You can speak freely. Word is that George Strait offered to buy Hernandez Cafe because of you," Carlos explained. "Victor's telling everyone you're trying to ruin him, that you seduced a rich celebrity to get revenge for being fired." Melissa's jaw dropped. "That's insane. I never asked George for anything like that." Tamara's expression had grown serious. "George didn't mention this to me." Is it true then? Carlos asked. George Strait really is involved with you? Not the way everyone's implying, Melissa said firmly. He bought my pastries when I was selling them on the street. He was kind to me, that's all. Carlos didn't look entirely convinced. And the scholarship to Austin Culinary Institute? Everyone knows those are nearly impossible to get. Melissa felt her cheeks burning. Put that way, George's assistants did seem extraordinarily generous, suspiciously so to outside observers. Carlos, she said carefully, why are you here? He sat on the edge of the coffee table, leaning forward intently. I quit Hernandez Cafe this morning. The way Victor was talking about you, I couldn't take it. He took a deep breath. And I wanted to tell you something. The baby, your baby. I've been thinking a lot about it. About us. Tamara quietly excused herself to the kitchen, giving them privacy while remaining within earshot. Carlos, Melissa began cautiously, there is no us. We went on 2 dates, that's all. I know, but... He reached for her hand, which she gently withdrew. Maybe there could be. I'm not like Miguel, running away from responsibility. I could help you, be there for you and the baby. Melissa stared at him, genuinely surprised. Carlos had been pleasant during their brief dating period, but had shown no interest in a serious relationship. Now suddenly, he wanted to play father to another man's child. Then comprehension dawned. This is about George Strait, isn't it? You think I have some connection to him that could benefit you? Carlos had the decency to look embarrassed, but he didn't deny it. Look, I've been trying to break into music for years. My band keeps getting close to opportunities, but we never get that big break. If George Strait heard us play just once, please leave, Melissa said quietly, disappointment weighing heavily in her chest. Mel, I didn't mean... Yes, you did, she interrupted, her voice stronger now. You didn't come here because you care about me or this baby. You came because you saw an opportunity. After Carlos left, Tamara returned to the living room, sitting beside Melissa on the couch. Are you okay? I thought he was my friend, Melissa said, wiping away an angry tear. I guess money and fame change how people see you, even the possibility of those things. Unfortunately, that's often true, Tamara agreed. She hesitated before asking, do you want me to call George about the cafe situation? He should know what's being said. Melissa shook her head emphatically. No, he's done more than enough. This is my mess to handle now. Later that afternoon, Elena returned from work earlier than expected, her expression troubled. Mija, I was let go today. What? Why? Mrs. Dunham said she found another cleaning service, Elena explained, though her tone suggested she didn't believe this reason. But her daughter asked me if it was true that you were having George Strait's baby just before I left. Melissa buried her face in her hands. This is getting out of control. Tamara stood up decisively. I think it's time I called George. Despite Melissa's protests, Tamara stepped onto the small apartment balcony to make the call. Through the glass door, Melissa could see her gesturing animatedly, her expression growing increasingly concerned. When Tamara returned, her face was grim. George wants to come over. He feels responsible for what's happening. No, Melissa objected. That will just make the rumors worse. He's worried about you, Tamara insisted, and he says there's something important you need to know. An hour later, a nondescript sedan pulled up outside the apartment building. George emerged from the passenger side, while a serious-looking man in a blazer, clearly security, remained behind the wheel, scanning the surroundings vigilantly. When George entered the apartment, Melissa was struck by how different he looked from their first meeting. Gone was the relaxed demeanor. In its place was a tightly controlled tension. He removed his hat respectfully, nodding to Elena. Mrs. Rodriguez, I apologize for the disruption my involvement has caused your family. Elena shook her head. You have been kind to my daughter. These rumors are not your fault. George turned to Melissa. But they are, in a way. I should have been more careful about being seen at the hospital, about how my help might be perceived. He sat in the chair Tamara offered. And I should have told you about Hernandez Cafe. So it's true? Melissa asked. You tried to buy the cafe? George nodded. I was going to surprise you with a position there after you graduated. A head pastry chef role in a place you already knew, with creative control over the dessert menu. Melissa was speechless, torn between gratitude for his thoughtfulness and dismay at the complications it had created. Victor Hernandez called. My lawyer this morning? George continued. Not only did he reject the offer, but he threatened to go to the tabloids with what he called the real story about us. George's expression hardened slightly. I don't take kindly to threats. What did you do? Elena asked, concern evident in her voice. Nothing yet, George assured her. But I need to know what Melissa wants to do. This affects her most directly. All eyes turned to Melissa, who felt utterly unprepared to make such a decision. I just want the rumors to stop. I want my mother to get her job back. I want to have this baby and go to culinary school without everyone whispering about me. George nodded thoughtfully. I understand, and there's a way to accomplish that, but it would mean going public with the truth, the whole truth, about how we met and why I decided to help you. A press conference? Tamara suggested. More personal than that, George said. I was thinking of inviting a trusted journalist to tell the real story. Someone who won't sensationalize it. Before Melissa could respond, another knock came. At the door, louder and more insistent than Carlos's had been. Tamara checked the peephole and frowned. It's Victor Hernandez, she reported quietly, and he's not alone. George stood, placing his cowboy hat back on his head. Let me handle this. Elena moved protectively closer to Melissa as George opened the door to reveal Victor Hernandez, a short, stocky man with a perpetual scowl, accompanied by a thin woman clutching a reporter's notebook. Behind them stood Miguel Diaz, Melissa's ex-boyfriend, and the father of her unborn child. Mr. Strait, Victor said with mock politeness, how convenient to find you here with your protégé. The woman beside him began scribbling furiously in her notebook. Mr. Strait, I'm Lucia Vega from the Austin Daily. Would you care to comment on your relationship with Ms. Rodriguez? George's expression remained impassive. Ma'am, I don't recall inviting you into this home. Victor smirked. We're here to clear things up. Since you tried to ruin my business based on lies, this girl told you. I never lied about anything, Melissa interjected, attempting to rise from the couch until her mother gently restrained her. Miguel stepped forward, his handsome face arranged, in an expression of wounded dignity that Melissa knew all too well. I just want to know why you're involved with my girlfriend and my baby, Mr. Strait. Ex-girlfriend, Melissa corrected firmly. You made that very clear when you blocked my number after I told you I was pregnant. The reporter's eyes lit up at this exchange, her pen moving even faster across the page. George assessed the situation with the calm calculation of someone who had navigated public confrontations for decades. Miss Vega, I'd be happy to give you an exclusive interview tomorrow at my office through proper channels. But right now, you're trespassing in a private residence where a pregnant woman under doctor's orders for bed rest is being harassed. He turned to Victor and Miguel. As for you, gentlemen, I suggest you leave before I ask my security associate to escort you out. He gestured toward the window where the suited man from the car now stood vigilantly watching the building entrance. Victor hesitated, clearly caught off guard by George's composed response. Miguel, however, was not so easily deterred. You can't buy your way out of this one, old man, he sneered. Everyone knows you're trying to play savior to impress a pretty young thing. It's pathetic. A flash of anger crossed George's face, so brief that only those who knew him well would have caught it. But when he spoke, His voice remained steady. "Son, I've been called worse by better men than you. Now I believe I asked you to leave." To everyone's surprise, it was Eleanor who broke the tense standoff. She stepped forward, placing herself between George and the unwelcome visitors. "Miguel Diaz," she said, her accented English clear and deliberate, "when my daughter told you she was carrying your child, you said, and I quote, 'That's your problem, not mine. You have no claim to her or my grandchild now.'" She turned to Victor. "And you, who fired a dedicated worker simply for being pregnant, have no right to speak of injustice." She faced the reporter directly. "If you want a story, Miss Vega, write about how a famous man showed more human decency in one meeting than these men have shown my daughter in years. Now, as Mr. Strait said, please leave." The authority in Elena's voice, the same tone that had kept her 4 children in line through difficult years of immigrant struggles, brooked no argument. Even Victor seemed cowed as the 3 visitors backed out of the apartment. When the a door closed behind them, Elena let out a shaky breath, her moment of strength giving way to trembling hands. "Dios mío, what have I done?" "You've stood up for your daughter," George said simply, genuine admiration in his eyes. "Mrs. Rodriguez, if I may say so, you are a remarkably formidable woman." Melissa reached for her mother's hand, squeezing it gratefully. "Mama has always been the strong one." Tamara, who had been quietly observing the confrontation, spoke up. "They'll be back. If not them specifically, then others like them. Once a story like this starts, it doesn't just disappear." George nodded grimly. "She's right. We need to get ahead of this narrative." He turned to Melissa. "I know this isn't what you wanted, but I think we need to consider that press statement sooner rather than later." Melissa closed her eyes briefly, one hand resting protectively over her belly. When she opened them, there was new resolve in her gaze. "Okay, but I have conditions." "Name them," George said. "First, no cameras in my home or around my family. Second, I tell my story my way, not as some charity case or scandal, but as a baker who got a chance to pursue her dream." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "And third, this is a one-time thing. After this, I want to earn my way forward on my own merits, not as the girl George Strait helped." George smiled, the first genuine smile since he'd arrived. "Sounds reasonable to me." What none of them realized was that Miguel had lingered. In the hallway outside the apartment, his ear pressed to the door, listening to every word of their planning. As he slipped away, a calculating smile spread across his face. He might have lost this round, but the game was far from over. Melissa's story was about to get much more complicated, and the baby she carried was his strongest playing card.